stories and get their stories to the limelight. And beyond that, to also help them build and scale their platforms and businesses.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, the topic is promise to impact, which is understanding the African markets to build better innovations. There's a lot that has been talked about when it comes to African tech and the African ecosystem. And there's so many promises, but then does that also move you to the trajectory of impact? And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today. And before we go into that, I'm going to start with a basic question, which I'm going to ask my panelists. What does impact mean to you in your field? I'll start with you, Asha.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great question because impact certainly means very different things to each and every one of us actually. At Aptera Capital, we're very clear that as investors we have a purpose, an obligation to create impact. And for us, impact means ensuring that Africans living on the continent are able to live prosperous lives. So driving prosperity on the continent is for us key impact. The question is, well, how do you define it and what are the themes around impact? For us, we've identified 6 themes with which we sort of view opportunities, I want to say. The first one is financial inclusion. We believe that financial inclusion drives prosperity. Once you have access, once you have availability into finance, you're able to grow, you're able to live more prosperous lives. Gender lens is something that's very key for us as well, so ensuring that there is more equity, not just in the workplace, but actually in the access to funding, for instance, as well, for female founders. One of the key impact themes is climate action. So this really means how do we ensure that in the transition into more climate-friendly or renewable products, we're able to actually support that transition. So how do we make that access easier, more accessible for more amount of people? And then of course you have 3 more themes, and these are quality jobs, quality healthcare, and quality education. And we see that financial inclusion, in fact, unlocks a lot of these other 3 key themes.
Interesting. Miyaka, do you want to say something?
Yes. So as Ashim has said, impact just means very different things to us. And from the perspective of a strategist who works in branding and communications, there's impact for me involves a chain of people. The first would be the founders, the business owners, and this is just making sure that all of the efforts that I put in as a strategist actually just converts to them for them in terms of the core business goals. And we're talking for founders, we're talking actual revenue, right? So making sure that I'm able to support them in that regard. And then we go to the consumers, and impact on my end would look like being able to properly understand the problems of these consumers, being able to accurately communicate these problems to the innovators so that the solutions that come back to them actually meet a core need for them. And then the third layer would be how it trickles down to investors and impact, in that regard, or impact that is expected of me in the case of investors would be me being or making sure that my efforts actually translate to keeping the growth trajectory of their portfolio companies, the startups that they actually invest in, making sure that whatever it is that I do actually translates in keeping things on track for them. And those are for those that obviously they've invested in, but for those who they haven't yet invested in or are looking to invest in growth, impact would look like me making sure that my efforts actually supercharge the growth of the companies so that they're able to actually see real potential to invest in these companies. So that's a more well-rounded look at what impact would mean from my end. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take it from.
Okay, thank you. So from our end, we define impact in 2 terms. So one is amplify, and second is influence. So on the amplifying part, we help African innovators amplify their innovations and bring them to the limelight. And beyond just that, through storytelling, beyond just that, we also help connect them with the right resources and capital. We do this for Africans, innovators both in the continent and diaspora. That's on the amplifying part, and we've done this for loads of startups, African startups both in the continent and diaspora. I can mention like a few, Famara, we have like a lot that will help amplify that innovations. Then influence, what we also do is to engage government policymakers through our content, helping them, supporting them in creating an enabling environment for innovation to thrive in Africa. So for us, we believe impact entrepreneurs are powerful allies, and this can be seen through their innovations, risk taking, and access to capital. We believe that they are well and strategically positioned to deliver greater impact, and we should all support their efforts globally.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that across the board everyone understands is that there is a decision for the people who are responsible for or going to be beneficial towards all of these things, like all when it comes to impact. We all know that from the cleaner to the growth to the influence, it's the people that it still goes back to. And we bring me to my next question. I'm going to focus this on action and Anyanwu. As a stakeholder in the African startup ecosystem, what are some of the key recurring patterns that you see that why investments can actually yield within a particular operation? So what is it that you keep seeing as a recurrence that you know fully well, and why is it that the startup is not doing investment? I'm going to start with you, Action, since you're the one. They don't give you money.
I think it's a fair question. However, I would, my contrarian view probably would be that it's a misleading question, no offense. The reason I would say that is because A, Africa is not one ecosystem. We're a continent of 54 countries, several regions, thousands of cultures, languages, various different influences, and different stages of economic growth and all of that. And so therefore, I would actually say that while there are trends, I would probably argue that the trends are not really on the African ecosystem per se, but you can probably see the trends across some of the sub-regions within the African continent. But if I was to summarize on some of the reasons, I suppose, or barriers, I think was the word, that may impede return on investment to, yield within a certain time frame, I'd probably say a couple of things. The first is that the early stage ecosystem in Africa is still incredibly nascent. It's like in its baby shoes, okay? We haven't yet grown up. Having said that, we've got to remember where startup, ecosystem, venture capital really came from, okay? And upon what basis it was built on. So if we're taking these things into account, then we can actually say that, okay, actually, maybe the time frame upon which we have set the expectations was in itself never realistic. If we're setting the same expectations for returns to be yielded as we would in a developed market, then from the onset, we have in fact already set ourselves up for failure. That would be my very honest and humble opinion. So I think having a very clear view of what is a realistic time frame in my market, understanding that we face very different infrastructural challenges in emerging markets in Africa than, for instance, in a more developed or mature ecosystem, is the first step to ensuring that whatever return expectations you have promised may in fact actually bear fruition. The other one would also be to really understand what are the pain points that people in fact are facing, and am I able to monetize the solution that I believe would make everything better for the people. I think oftentimes we look at the market and we say, "Ooh, Nigeria, huge market, 200 million people plus." Okay, that's right. We are 200 million people plus. Out of the 200 million people, what is the pain point? How many people share the pain surveyed how many people in fact identify with the pain point? Have you ensured that you have a very clear understanding not only of the addressable market, but of the actual obtainable market? Have you made sure that you are then designing a solution that in fact can be procured, paid for by these people? Do your stakeholders have money in their pockets? What are the impediments to people using the money in their pockets for your solution? What does the competitive landscape look like? So I do believe that sometimes we have a very simplistic view of saying, well, I have a great product. I think it's, the best thing since sliced bread, or since agege bread, however we want to say it here locally. But actually, I may not have actually validated that properly. And I think it's a great opportunity for founders to validate their business models with other stakeholders, whether these are advisors, whether these are investors, whether these are through accelerators or incubators. But certainly, these would be some of the very high-level trends, I suppose, that we do see, across various regions. But I think always important for us to remember that Africa is a huge ecosystem, and we do have varying reasons why, we may not be seeing some returns in the expected time frame as expected. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Before we go on, I would like to reintroduce Kennedy. I mentioned that he is CEO of Keeper, and he was trafficking.
I'm so sorry. Sorry, everyone.
So yeah, that's he's going to be joining us, of course, but I have any take on the question.
Right. I'm going to piggyback off of what Ashim has said, and like she mentioned, there's quite a number of reasons as to why investors may not see their returns maybe at the expected time. But something that in my just my professional experience, something that has been there's been one key recurring pattern, and that is a lack of understanding of the African business. That has been like a major thing that we've seen time and time again, and something that we also need to understand is, so I'm just going to share briefly that my team and I actually just concluded a research report, and what we did was it was a multi-stage interview with startups in Nigeria, Kenya, and Rwanda, 7 of them, and this same issue was something that we saw recurring. So they didn't have clarity on exactly who these users were, and then they didn't also have that clarity as to how their products actually fits in the lives of these users who actually are meeting the needs of the users. And it's just that same cycle that we keep seeing. And when we look at brands like Keeper, it's very easy for us to just think like, how do they get there? But then we look at, we focus on, they raised 3.2 million in pre-seed, they did 8.4 in seed round. So we think like, oh, that's what got the business there. But what, if anybody doesn't know, what they did was they had a founders market fit tour around Nigeria to actually understand their users, know what are the actual pain points, not just like assumptions. And so when you look at brands who are, or companies who are successful, you can actually we look at exited brands like Paystar, who actually got there. How did they get there? It's understanding, you see this recurring pattern of the ones that actually get there or give return on investments are the ones that actually understand the users. So I think that when we are, if investors are looking at investing more in Africa, I think it's really to significantly up their chances of getting the return on investment. What I recommend is investing more in founders that actually know the users and are able to translate the knowledge of these users into real solutions that are solving real problems for the African user. So, yeah.
Thank you. Just to even add to this, it's an interesting question. It's mostly just to always talk about these things because there is a very interesting opinion or understanding that businesses, founders don't necessarily get investment. Or investors are not necessarily investing in Africa for X, Y, and Z purposes. I remember one of our portfolio companies in Morocco was was talking about their investment and how in Morocco it's actually amazing for you to be able to get over $600,000. In comparison to, like locally, it's actually huge. But they were feeling some type of way when you look at it in comparison with other, this person has $1 million PC, this one has like, $3 million secrets. So these are like interesting. I think it's also interesting for us to have founders and startups also think about looking around within your business and within your local environment. If you're doing really well, it means that you're setting the tonality for other people, other founders to be able to go on. And I'm glad that those are some of the things that you guys have touched upon. Question's not like a trick question, but yeah. That being said, moving into Kennedy, I feel like you have to talk because you just came. So I'm just going to go straight to it. So I'm saying this question is from a founder's perspective. What are the things that founders should take into consideration and be aware of when building a sustainable business in Africa?
I wish I knew the answer to that question because I'm still trying to figure it out myself. Everything I would say here is more like a note to myself in response to that question. I think the most important quality when it comes to building sustainable businesses for young founders is firstly understanding that you don't have the answers and very few people have the answers. Investors don't, your very smart executives who you've raised money to hire, they don't. So, more often than not, it's all on you, right? But it really requires spending an obsessive amount of time with users. Like everyone says it, yeah, spend time with your users. What does that even mean, right? But it's so true, but that's just one layer. There's a temptation when you spend time with users to impose upon them what you think they should be saying or what they should want, and it's very ego-driven. The second part is really not being afraid to be someone who can stare deep into the abyss, right? Your first, second, third, fourth, fifth take at the problem is very likely not going to be the answer, right? And don't get drunk on your own Kool-Aid. And it's also very easy to be lustfully drawn to being someone who is like, oh yeah, I'm the golden kid, I understand, because investors are telling me that and everyone is telling me that. And there's an ego hit that you take when you admit that you're wrong. So I think when it comes to building sustainable businesses, what works for me, when I feel the best, when I feel, like I'm on that path, it's usually times where I'm learning from what our users are saying, shutting things down, shutting products down, going in a different direction and doing that off and on. I think staying on the right path really requires internally, like taking micro pivots every time until you get to what it is. I think that's probably the only thing I can say, and maybe in 2-3 years when we figured more out, I'll be able to answer that question with a lot more depth. But that's what I know for now.
I love the choice of phrases. Ego kill, drunk on your own Kool-Aid. All of those interesting phrases that is actually true. But
I took my English classes.
But I feel like that's a very, I think you said you don't really know, but I think that those are very interesting things because sometimes there's a little bit of a God effect where people start feeling like, yes, I figured this out and I know this and I'm now raised and so now I'm general overseer, gatekeeper, all of those things. But then you now have to deal with an ego kill. So I think you've been able to give some considerably good, roadmap towards doing. I don't think that there is a one size fits all for it. I'm going to come straight to you, Oliver. So you see this media, any small thing, this person raised $1 million, and then everybody is just going, wow, did you see that? Keeper raised. Did you see that? SpaceX is exited. Did you see that? And that's one of the draw that media has been. I won't say it's a bad thing, but it also comes with interesting things. Do you think that media is actually kind of supportive or detrimental to the ecosystem when it comes to these things? And how do you think it can be better managed? It can be yes or no, but yeah.
Thank you. So for us, I think the media is doing a whole lot, but I think it also depends on what the audience wants to listen to. So most times they are easily driven or attracted to the raise, the funds, and no thanks to our founders too, because most times these founders don't even want to engage with the media. Most times they are always focused on their product, building this product, and they leave the media out of it, and they only engage the media once they are raising funds or they are having one deal or the other. But beyond just that, I think the media is also doing a whole lot because we now have loads of African media like pushing and telling the African stories, of these great minds, both in the continent and diaspora. So for me, I still feel yes, we need to do more, but we are doing a whole lot. And also just to say that most of our founders would prefer to engage with the Western media. Like we believe that most of the African stories are still told like most of the stories, like large part of our stories are still being told by Western media, which when we ask an average founder, they prefer that to their own local national media platforms. But beyond just that, I still feel we are doing a whole lot, and we are not just telling these stories for telling sake, but also to inspire potential entrepreneurs. People that are looking up to these guys to how do I start my business? Like, does this really work? People that want to transit from the corporate world to entrepreneurship or just leaving school to go into business. Like, how does this really work? So beyond just telling these stories, we also provide, give them the basic resources that they need to know. So information that will guide them, that will also help them understand how the whole thing works. So I think for us, the media is doing a lot. Yes, we can do more better, but we are doing a lot.
So I also have something to add, right? And the question is topical because I canceled my TechCrunch subscription earlier this week. I think the slide doesn't seem to work, but I think for many young founders, and I see that as someone who gets a lot of requests from founders. Oh, we're trying to build an MVP. We have a 15-person team, and we're trying to raise. I'm like, why do you have a 15-person team? What the hell? And you don't have a product thing. Because for many of us, our first introduction into the tech community is through TechCrunch and through articles around fundraising, and there's a lot that it does to, I think, poison in a negative way the minds of people who potentially can be good founders, and on the flip side, intimidate those who potentially will be good founders. I don't think the media has it, I think the most important role that the media plays today is telling stories from the continent to the investment community outside. But I think at best it's that, and I think we should de-glorify our TechCrunch culture, and I'm personally committing to doing that for myself, both as a founder and as a reader. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, just take it away.
I wanna very quickly add something. Two things maybe. One is that, look, sensationalism sells. Okay, let's be very clear. And so the media also has a monetization model that they need to follow. They need to be able to pay salaries. They need to be able to pay for whatever subscriptions they have or whatever. So it is clear that they are also giving the public what they want. At the same time, media always has had a responsibility and an obligation, as you say, to do better. And I think in the doing better, we do need to define that, and we should say, okay, well, what is it that we need to do better on? I would love to see more richness, more meatiness in the way that we communicate. However, I also know that the media sometimes is restricted because you do get press releases from companies and they tell you how they would like to be portrayed, because we all like to look good, right? Especially when we're in front of people. So I think there is a real avenue to say, okay, well, how do we engage with this ecosystem, with this community, to say, we want to tell the real stories, we want to give a little bit of a glimpse of what happens behind, right? So yeah, great that you've raised $1 million, but so what? So what? That was like the mic drop on the so what, right? So I think the question really has to be, okay, so what? What is the problem you're going to solve? What is the $1 million going to do? How is that $1 million going to enrich our continent? How are we going to make sure that that $1 million turns into, $10 million? Not in funding, by the way, okay? Because that's not a real number, okay? You can raise money. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have a path to profitability. It doesn't mean that you even have a path to revenues, okay? Plenty companies who are pre-revenue, who've raised millions of dollars and you're not going anywhere. So the real question is, what is it that we want to be known for on the continent? What are the stories that we want to have out there? It doesn't matter if it's TechCrunch or it's BOA, it doesn't actually matter who is the mouthpiece, but I think as a continent, we've got to be clear on what is the narrative that we want to tell. And then we've got to do better in telling that narrative. And the narrative cannot be a Silicon Valley-ish or esque, narrative. It should be a deeper, richer narrative. And so the readers have a responsibility, as well as the media itself.
I'm gonna just play devil's advocate a little bit. I don't know if this is really devil's advocate, but okay. But so going back to Yalaba. Now, we've said we've raised $1 million. It's nice and dandy. Oh God, one of the new unicorns is happening. Wow, amazing. And then we find out, and I remember like that, there was this era of like most of these like startups that were just, it was like a buzz of like either there was firing or there was people were losing their jobs, there was just like things happening in the company. And you can see that it almost felt like a TMZ of all of these media platforms, literally just like, it's like as opposed to actual doing investigative journalism in regards to some of these companies. Because it almost feels like you're taking advantage of them when you want to take advantage of them, which is, oh yeah, they're raised, you want to be able to talk about them. They send you press release. In fact, sometimes they don't edit it, you just copy and paste it there. Whether they spell the name correctly, just spell it correctly. You do that. Now, I'm not working communications. I'm not calling out anybody. I'm just asking a question. But I'm now asking you, as from a media perspective, how is it possible that it's almost like, and that's also what Ashton is trying to do, which is what is the I plan my new to making sure that you guys will not be progressing in that capacity. It will not prevent my business from moving, however. But I'm just now bringing it back is, how is it possible that with everything that happened and all of the many things that happened, there is still an inability for the media to be able to dig deep? Because you cannot release 3 big pieces on one person's business. Oh yes, they release tomorrow, they say, oh, 3 people came out again, as opposed to actual detailed investigative journalism, especially if you are the person communicating to the outside world, the Western world, that these are, because whatever it is that's communicated, they're seeing it. And so when they're having an issue like founders or startups and there is a pushback, these are some of the information that are fueling that kind of decision. So are you saying that, or what are you saying in terms of how media can be better in trying to communicate? Unless you're trying to tell me that our publications are TMZ and they're just using tech. I'm not going to say tech country.
Okay, so first, I think it's good to still tell those stories because for us, those stories inspire people looking to raise funding, right? But beyond just that, also too, the media also has a challenging end of engaging this startups, this founder, because most of them, like I said, hardly wants to open up to the media. The major thing they do is just interviews and when they raise funds, right? So most times it's hard for us, the media, to kind of penetrate because most times the funding that they raise, there's always a disclaimer or non-disclosure kind of, because some VCs want it like on low, like private, like just in between them, between the startups and the VCs. So most times it's very hard for you to. But for us, what we keep doing as a media is one, like I said, keep telling the stories too, but also keep telling the right stories about founders generally, entrepreneurship generally, the growth of the ecosystem generally, and other stakeholders playing their part, playing their role. Yeah, like I said, the media still needs to do more in terms of investigative journalism too, but we also need the founders, the startups to get closer to us to give us the right information, because it's based on what they tell us we largely work on.
I think I think we can all agree to an extent. There's a very, from a founder perspective, from an investor perspective, even from a media perspective, there should be something called a due diligence process. And that due diligence process should be able to validate either you're trying to bring in someone as an investor, or you're trying to invest in someone, or you're trying to invest in a business, or you're trying to be managing a brand. It should also run for media as well. Because I cannot just, some of the businesses that you will now start seeing, this person ran away with X amount of money. If you have done, there's some things you just is shady. You're like, how is it that this wasn't paid attention to? Or even sometimes it's just the regulations and some of the things that are happening in the continent. Now, this is none of them. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to call up because you should stop in my country. Kennedy, do you want to say something?
Yeah,
One very quick comment on the whole TMZ thing. I think I've thought about that. Like, well, we cost it, right? When you invite the devil into your home, you have to get ready for nightmares, right? But it's now public business. It's now our business. So
better contextualization. So we speak about things that are imported from the West here. You don't use as an example, since we have Kiba. I'm going to use it as an example. Something interesting that they did in their research phase was also to speak to founders who have something like they're searching for them, was that requiring contextualization. Catapults, which will be focusing on digitalization of bookkeeping. You have the Kiba team who actually they focus on giving people access to finance, right, for businesses in Nigeria. So they could easily hold this thing like that. Why don't we, replicate, or why don't we copy and paste? We had to tweak it. So I would say better context, because when you don't have that context, why that becomes a barrier is because the African user automatically just thinks you don't understand my problem, and so I can't let you solve. So you get pushback, so you're not able to thrive in the market, right? So I would say better context in terms of solutions that we develop.
Okay, Alaba.
Yeah, okay, so for me, I think we need a role model founders. So Kennedy has said too, we need founders that really that suits that market fit and can deliver and can make impact. So I think for that, I want to say that.
Okay, Ashim.
Okay, thanks. I agree with what my co-panelists have said. I think when it comes to innovation, first maybe let's go back to how do we interpret innovation, right? Again, it's probably something like impact where we may all have a different understanding. There's a great book by Peter Thiel, 0 to 1, I'm sure some of us have read it. And he defines innovation in twofold. One, when you take something that exists and you make it better, okay? And Vanessa will agree with me, and Onyeka as well, is that when you oftentimes get decks from founders, they will in fact coin it as, I'm building the something for Africa, okay? So this is still innovation because you've seen something that works elsewhere. You've decided that, hey, I need to contextualize it and make it better for the African continent. So that is a form or a type of innovation. It is what Peter Thiel calls going from 1 to N, okay? So you've taken, it's already there, you're just now iterating it and then, sort of multiplying it. And the second type of innovation is the 0 to 1. You're taking something that does not exist and you're building something completely new. And that innovation, I think, is oftentimes one where we actually require for instance, our regulators to really ensure that they create more environment. We need more research and development facilities on the continent. We need a clear path, affordability, to patenting. Lagos State Research, Science Research Council, LASRIC, they actually do a great job with this. They intentionally seek out innovators and take them through the patenting process. They help them with the cost of it. I mean, just the other day, we were on a call with a founder and he said, hey, this is my second startup. The first one, unfortunately, I couldn't close my funding round because I didn't have enough money to get the patents through, okay? So getting innovation, like the 0 to 1 innovation, over the line is a real endeavor. It requires rugged founders with grit, yes, but it also requires an enabling environment that actually allows us to have more founders, more innovators, more research, more people who are saying like, okay, I want to contextualize for the African continent. I've realized that our problems are unique to our ecosystems. We've got to make sure that we are innovating for us. You know how they say, by us, for us, right? But in order to get more of that side of innovation, I really believe that we have to hold the regulators to provide some of those environments for us.
Very great points from everybody. I feel like if we collaborate everything fine-ish. I have a detailed question. Would you say, to an extent, that given, and I'm talking about now, set by ourselves maybe 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, in comparison to where we were, before all of this has happened or started happening. Because by the time we're going back to, after post-political climate, are we going to it's a question I'm going to ask everybody, and everybody can give me like their one-liners. Would you say that we've set ourselves back by 5 years? And by that would mean that political climate definitely is not a standalone from economic climate. So would you say we've set ourselves back by 5 years, considering? And if so, what is your one-liner? I'll start with you, Kennedy.
Well, what exactly are we talking about? Is it like the kidnapping and banditry, fuel scarcity, cash scarcity? Which of them?
Everything.
All of them.
Everything.
Have we set ourselves back? Like, I think if you put Nigeria on a graph, right, things have consistently gone. Broadly, if you zoom out, it's been that way. I do think in certain respects, and maybe this is contrarian, I do think we have decent regulators. I've had to interact with them a little bit more in the past 15 months or so. And they're not as unreasonable as we think they are. All right. With everything happening now, I do think there's a very significant execution flaw. The rationale behind it, look, I think it makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of positive intentionality behind it. I just think it's poor execution, and our civil service is not known for its great execution. So I hope we can fix that. I do hope we can come back from it. Usually in Nigeria, once the price of things go up, they never come down. But I hope this is cash, the price of cash comes down really specifically.
So that's a no, we do not go back. Or maybe.
I don't know that it's one of those binary answers, but yeah.
Okay. But do you have a binary answer?
Absolutely no. But yeah, so I think it's a setback for us, definitely. But I also want to see from a positive standpoint that it's also a learning curve, for us. And I think we can always improve on what we currently have and do better going forward. So the learning curve for us.
I don't know about learning curve for Nigeria. I feel like we're too resilient. It's like money. It's like when things go up, when inflation doesn't go down, we learn. We're now top. There's a lot of better learning curve.
I'm with about this. I do think,
Just give us some.
yes, there's been, sorry about that. Yes, there's been some setback, but I think like it just like it's what he said is the learning curve. I hope that like I don't want to say because the harder things get, it's almost like you have to innovate for, like repeatedly layer innovations on top of so that you can survive. But I'm hoping that we can innovate enough to, like that causes some really radical innovation to, it's the radical innovation is brought them out of, the problem or the things we're experiencing.
I don't know that there's a binary answer to this. So I'll argue both points. Yes, we have setback. Certainly the political climate is not removed from the economic climate. And the economic climate, not just in Nigeria, not just in Africa, but worldwide, has simply just not been very positive. For Nigeria especially, if we're looking at the local context, we've really had several headwinds. We've been downgraded as an economy. Our inflation rate is second to none. Our currency has depreciated, okay, not as much as some others in Africa, but unfortunately that's not a measuring stick. We are persistently getting poorer as a nation, which means that we have less money in our pockets, we have less money to educate our children, we have less money for health care, and that invariably means that, we don't have money to do anything else, okay? We are literally on the very bottom of that pyramid of needs, okay? But I would vehemently argue, no, it has not set us back. And I would say that because one, as you've said, a volatile environment always gives room for innovation.
Absolutely.
Even the POS people, they're not innovating.
Yeah.
They found a way to make money.
I'm telling you.
Hey, why are you hating? They have said, because they're looking at it, time value of money, right? They're like, okay, I've spent time trying to get this cash. Therefore, you gotta pay me for my time because you don't want to stand in the queue, right? But I have. So therefore, there is innovation. We can argue whether or not it's a great innovation, whether it's fair, and all of those points, right? But a business is business, and it's not always fair, depending on which side of business do you stand on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would also argue that no, we haven't actually been set back because we have, I believe, over time, in fact, built an incredibly strong ecosystem in this country. We have, thanks to a lot of people who've put in a lot of work, actually been able to push forward a lot of regulation that is now more enabling. There are only 4 or 5 countries in Africa who have a startup bill. Nigeria is one of them. It is a big deal, okay? Yes, we know that execution and enforcement is not always great, but we've got to start from somewhere.
Absolutely.
And I also believe that we do need to, as Kennedy has said, sometimes we have to be a little bit more open-minded when we are also working with the regulators, because the headwinds, as we said, are quite strong, right? So, yes, maybe the strategic intent was noble, the execution and planning was abysmal. However, the question is, what do we do with it? How do we innovate from it? How do we learn from it? Yes, we're resilient.